Good morning, I'm Dilek Tuna. You're watching A News. Here are the top stories. The EU vows financial backing for Kyiv, holding off on the frozen assets plan. The US President says strikes on land to follow US military attacks on suspected drug smuggling vessels in the Caribbean Pacific Ocean. At the UN Security Council, the Gaza ceasefire takes centre stage as countries condemn Israel's preliminary vote to annex parts of the West Bank. The UN Security Council has convened to review the fragile ceasefire in Gaza as diplomats debated the release of hostages, the delivery of humanitarian aid and ongoing tensions in the region. Key representatives from Israel, the Palestinian Authority and the United States addressed the Council, highlighting both challenges and responsibilities.
As the ceasefire brokered by the United States earlier this month in Gaza continues under close scrutiny, the UN Security Council remains focused on balancing humanitarian relief with security responsibilities in both Gaza and the West Bank. Diplomats debated the future of the ceasefire, the plight of hostages, and the urgent need for humanitarian aid. Palestinian Deputy UN Envoy Majed Bamia said the Palestinian Authority must be empowered to fulfill its duties and that Israel's obligations also need careful monitoring.
The efforts to undermine the Palestinian Authority and its ability to perform its duties, despite its full-fledged commitment to peace that has been put to test over the course of the last 2 years in unbelievable manners, aims at preventing our independence and our statehood. If there are requirements placed on the Palestinian Authority, it must be empowered to fulfill them. And Israel has also obligations that need to be monitored and implemented. We will not shy away from our obligations and from our commitments.
Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, responded, highlighting the ongoing hostage crisis.
Our struggle is not over. There can be no peace, no future, and no rebuilding of Gaza while terror still remains. 13 fallen hostages remain in Hamas's hands. We will bring them home and give them the dignity they deserve. The world must keep the pressure where it belongs, on Hamas, to return the hostages, to lay down its weapons, and to honor the peace plan it signed.
As has been noted,
the US also condemned attacks on civilians and hostages, calling for global outrage over recent killings.
And for the global community that has been protesting and demanding peace for the Palestinian people, for the people of Gaza, where is the outrage? Where is it over these executions we've seen in recent days? Hamas is not just attacking Israelis. It's not just terrorizing hostages underground. It's not just using bodies as psychological warfare on families. They are openly killing their own people for propaganda, in addition to the human shields that they've used over the past years. And candidly, shame on the world.
Earlier, Israel's parliament has preliminarily approved a bill to extend sovereignty over parts of the West Bank, a move condemned by Palestinians and closely watched by Washington.
Earlier, we interviewed Ambassador of the State of Palestine to Azerbaijan, Ahmet Matani, on the situation on the ground and the ongoing peace efforts as the ceasefire holds. Let's hear more from him.
All of the international community, they want to solve Palestinian issue, but the Israeli sides, they don't want to solve the problem. My dear, the two-state solution was proposed by the international community, not by the Palestinians. And we accepted, even though it was a painful compromise to accept to take only 22% of our historical land and give them 78%. But even though the Israeli now, they are building the settlements and put the fact on the ground. Hopefully the international community can take its responsibility to force Israel and make pressure on them to accept and respect the international law and United Nations resolution.
Now for more on the preliminary bill approved by Israel's parliament. The law to apply Israeli sovereignty to parts of the occupied West Bank has drawn sharp criticism from the Palestinians and concern from Washington.
Israel's parliament has approved a preliminary bill to apply Israeli sovereignty to parts of the occupied West Bank, territory Palestinians claim as part of their future state. The move has drawn sharp criticism from the Palestinians and concern from Washington, which says it could derail ongoing peace efforts. The proposal, which passed its first reading late Wednesday, still requires further parliamentary approvals before becoming law. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Israel's decision threatens President Donald Trump's plan.
But obviously, I think the president's made clear that's not something we'd be supportive of right now, and we think there's potentially even threatening to the peace deal. So they're a democracy, they're going to have their votes, people are going to take these positions, but at this time it's something that we think it might be counterproductive.
The Palestinian leadership has condemned the Knesset's move in the strongest terms. Hussein al-Sheikh, vice president of the Palestinian Authority, wrote on X that the Israeli Knesset's demand for the Israeli government to impose Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank represents not only a direct assault on the rights of the Palestinian people, but also a dangerous escalation that undermines the prospects for peace. The International Court of Justice said Wednesday that Israel must ensure civilians in Gaza receive essential aid and support UN relief efforts, including UNRWA. The court also noted Israel has not provided evidence that UNRWA staff are linked to Hamas.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio arrived in Israel for his 3-day visit with the goal of implementing Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan. Rubio arrived just after Vice President J.D. Vance's departure and is expected to meet Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu. His trip comes as a bill applying Israeli law to the West Bank won preliminary approval from Israeli lawmakers on Wednesday. Rubio has said that the Israeli Knesset's move towards the annexation of the West Bank could endanger Washington's plan to end the conflict in Gaza. As the ceasefire in Gaza holds, many displaced Palestinians continue to live in difficult conditions. Access to basic necessities such as water and shelter remains limited, and uncertainty about the future persists.
Days after a fragile ceasefire took effect in Gaza, many displaced families remain uncertain about what tomorrow will bring. Among them is Amna Abu Tuaime, a mother of 4 living in a worn-out tent on the outskirts of Khan Yunis.
I have had this tent since the beginning of the war. I have been moving from one place to another, and it is very worn out. We hope they will help us and bring in tents and covers for the people instead of this suffering.
The ceasefire, which began on October 10th, ended 2 years of relentless conflict. But even as guns fell silent, accusations of violations continue. The Israeli government and Hamas have both blamed each other for breaching the deal. According to Gaza's health ministry, at least 88 Palestinians, including civilians, have been killed since the ceasefire began. On the Israeli side, 2 soldiers were killed in clashes with militants over the weekend.
We are afraid that the war will return again. We couldn't believe the truce had happened because we are tired. We hardly get over one shock before another shock comes.
Daily life in Gaza's displacement camps remains a struggle. Even basic needs like water and shelter are difficult to find.
We're living a very difficult life. Even it is difficult to get water. There are queues for water, and our whole life is queues.
Many in Gaza live on edge, caught between the fear of war and the fragile promise of peace.
European Union leaders have wrapped up a key summit in Brussels where discussions largely focused on fresh support for Ukraine. While Kyiv welcomed new sanctions against Russia, talks over unlocking frozen Russian assets for Ukraine ended without a breakthrough. William Denslow reports from Brussels.
Heading into this summit of European leaders, there was plenty of positive momentum for Kyiv and its allies. Over in the United States, there's that news that that bilateral meeting between President Trump and his Russian counterpart has been scrapped, at least for now. Also, Washington announcing those sanctions on two major Russian oil firms too. Here, on this side of the Atlantic, well, the European Union has announced that 19th round of Russian sanctions. Included in that a ban on Russian liquefied natural gas from 2027, something that Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, says hits to the heart of Russia's war machine. But the major topic dominating much of the sentiment here at this meeting, a meeting that had Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky in attendance, was that of using Russian frozen assets as a loan for Kyiv, something to the tune of roughly $160 billion. Now, for Kyiv, they say they want to start using those funds as early as 2026. Volodymyr Zelensky says that will go not only towards Ukraine's reconstruction, but also providing with more military oomph going forward too. The major sticking point, getting the agreement from Belgium. The majority of those assets remain here in this country, and there are concerns about the legal ramifications. Russia has also warned of huge consequences should this plan come to fruition. Belgium is asking for more reassurances from fellow member states, including that if these Russian assets need to be repaid, will all member states chip in and foot the bill? At the conclusion of this meeting, no consensus was reached. That will be a topic for further conversations, potentially the next European Leaders Summit come December. The European Commission has been tasked with coming up with a wide spectrum of potential financing options for Ukraine going forward, but certainly for Kyiv now, huge disappointment that this issue of frozen Russian assets is yet to be resolved. For A News, I'm William Denslow in Brussels.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin said Moscow supports continued dialogue with Washington after US President cancelled their planned summit in Budapest and slapped new sanctions on Russia. Putin said that new US sanctions were an attempt to put pressure on Russia, calling them an unfriendly act. He said they would not affect the economy.
The US president has decided to cancel or postpone this meeting. More likely, he is talking about postponing it. What can we say? Dialogue is always better than any confrontation, any disputes, or especially war. That is why we have always supported continued dialogue, and we continue to support it.
US President Donald Trump has reignited controversy with some of his most forceful remarks yet on Latin America, accusing Mexico and Colombia of being controlled by cartels and vowing that US strikes on suspected traffickers will soon move from sea to land.
Colombia is very bad. Mexico is run by the cartels. I have great respect for the president, a woman that I think is a tremendous woman. She's a very brave woman. But Mexico is run by the cartels, and we have to defend ourselves from that.
The U.S. campaign against drug cartels is expanding. After ordering a series of strikes on suspected drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean and Pacific, President Donald Trump declared that the land is going to be next, suggesting Washington could soon hit targets inside sovereign territory. Trump's remarks come amid growing tensions in Latin America. Colombia's President Gustavo Petro condemned recent US strikes that killed several people at sea, calling them murder and a breach of international law. Venezuela also accused Washington of militarizing the region after 2 US B-1 bombers were tracked near its coast, a claim Trump dismissed.
It's not accurate. No, it's false. But we're not happy with Venezuela for a lot of reasons, drugs being one of them, but also...
At the same meeting, Trump doubled down on his uncompromising stance, saying there was no need for a formal declaration of war against cartels already designated as terrorist groups.
Well, I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth defended the strikes and warned the U.S. will actively pursue cartel networks.
The media is used to hearing that when it pertains to Afghanistan and Iraq and ISIS and al-Qaeda. And so we will track them, we will map them, we will network them, and we will hunt them and kill them.
In Caracas, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro, who faces his own U.S. sanctions, responded with a dramatic peace appeal.
Not war, not war, not war. Just peace, just peace, just peace, forever, forever, forever. Peace forever. No crazy war.
Maduro said any U.S. intervention would provoke a national uprising. But Washington maintains that its operations are focused solely on drug trafficking networks, not regime change. Since early September, at least 3 suspected drug trafficking boats have been destroyed in U.S. air and naval strikes across the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific, leaving nearly 40 people dead, according to regional authorities.
US President Donald Trump will meet his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in South Korea on the 30th of October. The White House has confirmed it will be the first face-to-face meeting for both leaders since Trump's return to office. The bilateral meeting will happen at the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. It comes as tensions rise between the United States and China, with Trump threatening to impose a 100% tariff on Chinese goods unless Beijing eases export restrictions on rare earths. The White House says discussions will focus on trade, technology and regional security. Trump is also expected to meet South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung and attend the ASEAN summit in Malaysia as part of his Asia tour.
To the USA, including...
Earlier, we were joined by Diogo Castro Silva, political analyst from Sao Paulo, Brazil, who said that uncertainty surrounds the possible US-China meeting, noting that Beijing now holds more leverage through its control of rare earths and may seek a deal on terms more favorable to China. Let's see more.
It's even uncertain that they will meet. It seems that they are going to meet, but it's not 100% sure. And there is an overall issue in terms of the China-US relations that was brought about by Trump's election and then what started as tit-for-tat sanctions. And it's a bit unclear what will be the new equilibrium to be reached. I think China sees it has an upper hand, mainly because it's using the rare earths as a leverage tool. There was a big fear in terms of the sanctions, but once they were used and China kind of survived to that, and well, then they lost the threatening power. So it's really unclear what will be the new equilibrium. If I would have to give an opinion, I would say the US is in a weaker position and China will look into a deal that is favorable or to punt it further to use its leverage a little bit more against the US.
Iran has rejected renewed nuclear negotiations with the US, saying Washington is making excessive and illogical demands, which have stalled the talks. Artur Shiraliliu has more.
Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi ruled out resumption of talks with the United States over Tehran's civilian nuclear program. stating that the stalled negotiations will not restart as long as Washington is laying down excessive and illogical conditions. Speaking to reporters on Wednesday upon arriving in the northeastern city of Mashhad to open the Provincial Diplomacy Conference, he said that the U.S. Special Envoy for Middle East, Steve Witkoff, has been making indirect contacts with Iran and sending messages through the intermediaries. Araghchi and Witkoff held few rounds of mediated talks in Oman and Italy this year, which were discontinued after the U.S. President Donald Trump joined Israel's attacks on Iran and bombed the nuclear facilities under UN safeguards last June. Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghai echoed Araghchi's statements and said the renaming of Department of Defense to the Department of War reflects Washington's lack of belief in diplomacy. In a meeting with university students, the Iranian diplomat said that U.S. policy of bullying and intimidation has troubled the entire international relations system. Iran's foreign minister told the participants of the Conference on Provincial Diplomacy that economic ties with neighboring countries are the breathing space in the wake of sanctions. Araghchi said that Iran's trade exchanges with each of its neighboring countries are more than total trade with Europe, which indicates importance of economic ties with neighbors. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, A News.
Earlier, we spoke to analysts from both Baku and Yerevan for perspectives on regional cooperation and political developments in the South Caucasus. From Baku, Rusif Husseinov, director of the Topchubashov Center, said that Azerbaijan and Armenia share a common goal of boosting regional and transcontinental connectivity, noting that reopening transport routes would benefit not only both countries, but also the wider Middle Corridor trade network. And from Yerevan, Boris Navasardian, a political analyst, said that Armenia is preparing for democratic elections next year, emphasizing that true democracy means unpredictability.
The one thing I know is that both countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, they are on the same page in terms of connectivity issues. Both countries are convinced and are driven by the desire to open the communication lines and roads, not only for their own benefits, but for the regional and even transcontinental connectivity, because we're playing a big game here. It's not only about Armenia, Azerbaijan, or South Caucasus. It's about the global trade.
And I think we are doing this work, and the more intense will be our meetings, and the more productive they will be in terms of delivering constructive ideas, the better our societies will be ready to continue the peace process, irrespective of internal political and possible changes. But I guess since the ruling party in Armenia is really interested in moving forward as quickly as possible, even in the rhetorics of the opposition in Armenia, we see more and more constructive pieces. They are not more trying to discredit as it before the August 8 agreements.
Saudi Arabia is expanding tourism investment at its historic Al Ula site. The kingdom plans to launch projects to attract private investors and turn the UNESCO World Heritage Site into a global tourism destination.
Saudi Arabia's ancient Al Ula is opening its doors wider, this time to private investors. The kingdom plans to launch $1.6 billion projects to turn one of its most treasured heritage sites into a global tourism magnet. At the heart of Saudi Arabia's northwestern desert, Al Ula, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is preparing for its next transformation.
We're embarking upon a big initiative to secure private sector investment, and we have about $6 billion worth of investment opportunities with about 21 projects that will be floating to the market sometime at the end of the year, early next year. Our primary markets are this region, the Gulf region, with 70% of our visitors really coming from Saudi, UAE, Qatar, etc. Then 30% are international, and the international breakdown is about 5% from the United States, about 5% from the UK, about 5% from China and from India, and then the rest from Italy, Germany, and France. So those are our top 10 markets.
Last year, Alula drew around 300,000 visitors, a number expected to more than triple to 1 million by 2030. But development will be carefully balanced. About 60% of the vast site remains a protected national park. The site's development will roll out in 3 phases and expected to finish by 2030.
We just finished phase 1, and we're entering into phase 2 now, and then we even have a phase 3. So we'll have lots of opportunities for investment, lots of opportunities for development as well.
Experts say that the transformation of Alula reflects Saudi Arabia's broader shift from an oil-based economy to one investing in heritage, creativity, and sustainable tourism.
As the United Nations marks its 80th anniversary, the world it was built to protect looks more divided than ever. Created to prevent another world war, the UN has helped shape peacekeeping, humanitarian aid and international law. But 8 decades on, the question remains, can it still meet tomorrow's challenges?
This conference will devote it. The story began in San Francisco in 1945. 50 nations gathered to sign the UN Charter, a pact to maintain peace, uphold human rights, and promote cooperation after the devastation of World War II.
The people of the United Nations.
From the start, the UN was built on 2 principles: dialogue and collective responsibility. Its 193 member states deliberate in the General Assembly, while the 15-member Security Council is tasked with maintaining international peace and security. Over 8 decades, the UN has witnessed a world transformed from the Cold War to decolonization and from peacekeeping in Africa to global health campaigns. It has served as a platform for negotiation, but also a stage for criticism.
By resigning, I would therefore, at the present difficult and dangerous juncture, throw the organization to the winds. I have no right to do so, because I have a responsibility to all those states members for which the organization is of decisive importance, a responsibility which overrides all other considerations.
Not all leaders have shared that faith. Over the years, frustrations have surfaced about how power is distributed inside the organization.
Now the Security Council is security feudalism, political feudalism for those who have permanent seats.
Critics like late Libyan leader Gaddafi argued that the veto system favors a handful of powerful nations, a debate that continues to this day. In 2025, the challenges are complex and interconnected. The war in Ukraine has paralyzed the Security Council, with Russia, a permanent member, accused of violating the UN Charter it helped draft.
None of this would have happened if Putin had not started this full-scale aggression. And only Russia deserves to be blamed for this.
In Gaza, aid convoys struggle to reach civilians because of the situation. In Sudan, civil war has displaced millions. Each crisis raises the same question: how can the UN act when its most powerful members are divided? Yet, beyond the political deadlock, the UN continues its day-to-day work, quietly saving lives. Peacekeepers operate in more than a dozen missions. UNICEF and the World Food Programme deliver food, vaccines and education to millions.
One of the great things about the United Nations is that it has this amazing network that it has developed across different countries, within countries, but also across different institutions. And what the UN is able is to really trigger that network and use it in crises, use it in pandemics like COVID.
But the UN is facing a financial crisis. The United States, its largest contributor, is in arrears by nearly $3 billion, prompting budget cuts and peacekeeping reductions. The funding gap has forced the UN to downsize peacekeeping missions in Africa and the Middle East.
I want other countries to put up money. I think it's unfair that we put up the money. Then people called me, they said, oh, let it go, and I let it go. Germany, France, other countries should put up money, and that's been my complaint from the beginning.
A number of countries have not paid their contributions, but what it has meant is that the United Nations, a number of institutions of the United Nations, is unable to perform its work, it's unable to plan, it's unable to be strategically present in discussions.
Meanwhile, calls for reform are growing louder.
A comprehensive reform is needed in the United Nations, especially in the Security Council. In fact, the world is bigger than 5.
Many argue that adding new permanent members such as India, Japan or Brazil could make the Council more representative of today's world. Beyond geopolitics, the UN faces new challenges from artificial intelligence and climate change to misinformation and growing distrust in multilateralism. Some member states are increasingly acting outside the system, forming smaller alliances and coalitions of their own. 80 years on, the United Nations remains imperfect but indispensable. It may not end every conflict, but it still offers a space for dialogue in a divided world. And as the next generation faces new wars, new technologies and new uncertainties, the question is not whether the UN can act, but whether nations still choose to act together.
And that's your news update for this morning. From all of us in the studio, thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.